just want to begin with an apology and a joke. So I'm not a philosopher. I am not an historian of ideas or a political scientist. I'm a legal historian, and I'm deeply concerned with questions of law and morality, as well as totalitarianism, which is one of my obsessions. Anyone who's familiar with me and my writings in Access would know that. So that's the kind of the apology. But I want to start with a joke. And this is a first page from a fictitious retrospective of the satirical newspaper The Onion. And on the front cover of the 2nd October 1949 issue, it says that a giant poster of Mao seizes power in China. Enormous placard now controls world's most populous nation. And the front story proceeds to relate how a mere advertisement for pork in Hunan province rose in size and prominence to seize power over China. And an enthusiastic commentator is quoted as saying, "This is one of the first times in Chinese history that we've been able to see one of our leaders. In the past, our great emperors were hidden from view in the Forbidden City. But in this new communist era of humble egalitarianism, the leader has come to reveal himself to us." Now, it's absurdly funny I find this a particular false piece of news or fake news. It captures something very important about the contrast between the Chinese rulership of the past and the personality cults of the 20th century China, as embodied in this commentator. However, the idea that the Chinese leaders, or that Mao Zedong himself was an emperor, is very, very persistent. So if you would review political science or history or journalism, here represented by these three works, there's this persistent idea that these leadership cults that we have in China in the 20th century can be traced straight back to the sort of fountainhead of imperial Confucianism. So these are kind of three examples. The books are not bad themselves, but I find the framework slightly misleading. Because in ancient China, no Chinese would know the face of the emperor, would not know the name of the emperor. And if we, for instance, look at coins such as this one with the portrait of Gustav III, the culture king, it says very clearly, Gustav III, King of Sweden by the grace of God, and his motto, the fatherland, and we see his portrait. Now, by contrast, his contemporary, the Qianlong emperor's coin, looked like this. And it merely states Qianlong currency. So Qianlong is just the name of the era. And then on the obverse side, we see the statement that this is minted in the southern mints of China. So this is kind of a very stark contrast, and I want to sort of explore the roots of this in terms of the Confucian sort of state system. So if we move on and think a little bit about Confucianism, we will understand why this is. So for instance, if you would kind of summarize Confucianism in like a neat sentence, it would probably be something around that the family is a microcosm of the state. That means that if families are maintained well through rituals, through filial piety, through the perpetuation of the species, so to speak, then the state is in good order. And that many of these family hierarchy is manifested through life rituals such as marriage, capping, funeral rites, the greeting rite, and so on. Now, in this system, the emperor is seen as the son of heaven. So the job of the emperor is to make sure that through the maintenance of proper rituals, the maintenance of filial piety, the maintenance of Confucian ideology, he is kind of taking care of the realm. He's responsible for state rituals. One of the most important one is the worship of heaven. And you could say that if Confucianism is a religion, which is open to dispute, it's the religion of one person. There's only one person is allowed to believe in God. The job of everybody else is to take care of family rituals and not bother themselves with state affairs, unless you are recruited to be an official or volunteering to be as such. So that's kind of one thing of thinking about this. And this idea of filial piety being primary duty of ordinary people is taken so seriously that we can look, for instance, at this quote in Confucius, where Confucius is having a dialogue with the governor of Shi, who says, "In our village, there's a man nicknamed Straight Body. When his father stole a sheep, he gave evidence against him." And Confucius answers, "In our village, those who are straight are quite different. fathers cover up for their sons, and sons cover up for their fathers. Straightness is to be found in such behavior. So the idea here is that you are supposed to lie on behalf of your family. The enforcement of criminal law is the responsibility of the state. It's not your problem, so to speak. And this idea was taken so seriously in the Chinese legal system that if you reported on your parents for a crime, you yourself would be punished. And if you reported falsely on your parents, you would be sentenced to death. If you reported on a crime that was true, that would lead to their punishment, you would be whipped, according to different kinds of legal codes. So this is taken very seriously. And so you could say that the fifth commandment, thou shalt honor thy father and thy mother, is taking precedence over the eighth commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. So this is one thing that I want to emphasize. So how is this manifested in the political culture of the dynasty that I've been studying, the Qing dynasty? And I want to start or look at one of the most important hortatory documents of the Qing dynasty, which is the Sacred Edict, which was issued in 1670 by the Kangxi Emperor, who had just survived a power struggle and ascended the throne. This was at the time when the Manchus, who had taken power in China, were in relatively a shaky state, and he needed to manifest his Confucian credentials in front of the Chinese scholar gentry, the ruling class. Now, if you look at this document, it looks like a kind of a list of commandments or apophthegms, Confucian virtues. They can be grouped into several different groups. The first group has to do with filial piety and neighborly harmony. That is to cultivate peace among neighbors, to cultivate filial piety. The second group of apophthegms has to do with moderation and economy, to be economic, to grow mulberry trees and practice agriculture. Then the second group has to do with heterodoxy and to maintain orthodox doctrines, to stay outside of law enforcement, to be courteous and polite in all manners. And then the final thing is to fully remit your taxes and to make sure that you do your duties to the state. Now, what is interesting with this document, and I've kind of doing some writing about this, is that nowhere in this list does it say that you should be loyal to the emperor. Nowhere does it say that you should worship the emperor. Of course, you should stay away from rebellion, you should stay away from breaking the law, but not primarily because that would violate the state, because it would violate your duties to your parents if you're punished. So this is one thing that I think sets Chinese Confucianism apart from many other doctrines. And you see where I'm going with this from in terms of the initial slide. Now, indeed, there was a kind of a worship of a placard in late imperial China. People were supposed to take part in reading rituals of this sacred edict. Here you have people lined up in order of precedence and virtue, worshipping this giant placard, not of Mao, not of the emperor, but of the sacred edict. So they're worshipping the virtues of the emperor as such, not as much as they're worshipping him as a person. So this is the closest you get to a personality cult in late imperial China. Now, this sacred edict became the object of a lot of commentaries. A lot of officials and scholars tried to ingratiate themselves with the emperor and with the government, and perhaps to forestall too many commentaries, the son of the Kangxi emperor, the Yongzheng emperor, issued an amplification of the edict, where he, in an essay of 10,000 words in Chinese, I don't know how many words in Manchu, explained each of these virtues to the common populace. And missionaries who came to China in the 19th century discovered that these kind of texts or amplifications were often extremely good for learning Chinese and learning Manchu, and also learning how to preach, because these were preaching documents where the emperor stands as a teacher of virtue that you are supposed to align with. Now, in this text, we find, for instance, quotes like this, which I think is another indication of how to think around this idea of filial piety as the central virtue. So here we can see in one of the commentaries, the Yongzheng Emperor quotes the Book of Rights, where it says that the body is that which has been transmitted to us by our parents. Dare anyone allow himself to be irreverent in the employment of the legacy? If a man in his own house and privacy be not grave, he is not filial. If in serving his ruler he is not loyal, he is not filial. If in discharging the duties of office he be not reverent, he is not filial. If he with friends he is not sincere, he is not filial. If on the field of battle he is not brave, we talked about courage, he is not filial. If he fails in these 5 things, the evil of the disgrace will reach his parents, dare he but irreverently attend to them. So this is another expression of how important filial piety is in relation to duties to the state. So its loyalty to the state, loyalty to the emperor or the sacred text is derivative of filial piety. So this is kind of one of the findings of my research in terms of thinking about political loyalty. Now, if we move on, we can see, for instance, this illustrated in family shrines, where the virtue of loyalty stands next to the virtue of filial piety, and in which also serving as an official on behalf of the family is not so much an expression of loyalty to dynasty as it is a loyalty to your family. You're bestowing grace on behalf of your ancestors if you serve the state. So I want to sort of conclude or talk a little bit about the conclusions to this. So one thing that I think I want to dispel in terms of thinking of public virtues is that there was no public imperial cult in late imperial China. And this, of course, stands in drastic contrast to most Western countries. We can kind of trace many of these ideas back to late imperial or to imperial Rome. The political loyalty of commoners was subordinate to filial piety. And if to the extent that ordinary people were supposed to be loyal to the state, it was more or less to stay away from crime, pay your taxes, do your duty if called up to serve the nation, but stay out of politics and above all, shut up. That is kind of the doctrine. And you can think of that, we were talking about positive and negative liberties, you can think of this as ordinary commoners only were subject to negative loyalty, in the sense that it was defined through penal sanctions, that if you were staying out of line or violating the laws, rebellion against the empire, then you were violating your ancestors. Now, active political loyalty is the exclusive domain of privilege of officials and banished service elites, meaning that it was only imperial officials that would meet the emperor, who would be privileged to speak to the emperor. This also applied to the Manchu service elite that were sort of framed as the slaves of the emperor. So that's kind of the positive side of loyalty. And this is where I'm going with this, is that it illustrates the limits of Confucianism as a heuristic to understand modern Chinese political culture. There is, I don't know how many documentaries I have watched or how many textbooks where people explain the success of China or Singapore with Confucianism, and how many people think that kind of this ginormous placard of Mao or Xi Jinping is an illustration of an eternal kind of Confucian imperial cult. So that's kind of one of the ideas I want to dispel with this. And of course, the consequence of the corollary of this is that personality cults in China, and of course, I do not have the time to talk about this in detail. This is a 20th century import from Europe, very consciously. And the first time you start to see portraits of emperors on coins is at the end of the Qing dynasty, when they have to find themselves a kind of a counterpart to Queen Victoria. Later, of course, you have the importation of personality cult to worship Sun Yat-sen. So by conclusion, I think I'm running out of time. Mao Zedong was never an emperor. Neither is Xi Jinping a new emperor. And guess what? I think that this is not good news. And the reason why I think this is not good news is that the emperorship of late imperial China was constrained authority. Confucianism formed a kind of unwritten constitution that constrained the behavior of emperors, that told them what they could do or not do with their political power. They were supposed to be filial to their parents. They were supposed to carry out imperial rituals. However, the very positivistic Marxist doctrine that is enforced in China today does not recognize such things. So when we're talking about Xi Jinping and Mao as modern leaders, we should take that seriously. We're not emperors. Thank you.
Thank you. So loyalty has switched from family to the political leaders, that is the Communist Party. Did I get you right?
Yes, in a sense. And I could say that if you study the Cultural Revolution or if you study the Mao era, they were trying to transfer the loyalty of people from the family to the state by demanding that children report on their parents. This was not, this is enormously painful for anyone to do, but if you brought up in a culture where reporting on your parents was subject to criminal sanction, something that was within living memory of people in the 1960s and the 1950s, then that also shows the transformation of values in China.
But why is not Xi Jinping an emperor? He has granted himself lifelong power.
Well, there are other types of autocrats that have lifelong power. That are presidents or dictators or Führers. And Xi Jinping is not an emperor in any Confucian sense. He may be an emperor in a wider sense, but not Confucianism is not where we should look for the explanation of his imperial authority.
But how has this radical shift from family loyalty to party loyalty affected the Chinese people?
I think now we're we are 70 or 80 years into PRC rule. And I don't think that Confucianism lives in China in any meaningful sense. And that if you talk to, even if you read scholarly literature, a lot of people have kind of forgotten how Confucianism wasn't just like a sort of fortune cookie philosophy, like do good things and be nice to your parents. It meant very real things in terms of ritual and law, things that concern me as a legal historian. And so it has been kind of be washed out of Chinese culture.
Is the hope of pluralism in China dead then?
It's very hard to make predictions, especially about the future. As Yogi Berra would say, I would not dare to say that all hope is away. We have the example of Taiwan that has illustrated that it's possible to have a wholesome democracy in a Chinese cultural sphere. We also have the example of Hong Kong, and I think that's why they're so dangerous, because Taiwan and Hong Kong illustrate that another China is possible.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very interesting. Thank you.